So the playoffs are a finicky thing. Playoffs are an interesting thing. Now, some people might wonder, hey, why are you wearing a jersey of a team that just got eliminated? One particular reason. I wanted to go. I wanted to go and take a look back at the history of the President's Trophy, and these guys were the most recent team to win it, the New York Rangers. So I wanted to take a look back at really kind of because for a lot of people who might not know a whole lot about hockey, if they're especially if there's anyone new hockey fans that are here that are here. First off, welcome if you are. And the President's Trophy is awarded to the team that finishes with the best regular season record. Most points. It's not based on points percentage or anything. It's based on how many points you get during the regular season. And this year, the New York Rangers had that. They won 55 games, and they played really, really well. They had a great season. They ran into a juggernaut in the Florida Panthers. Now, like I said, I wanted to kind of take a look back here at the history of the President's Trophy. Let's move this forward a little bit here, because the President's Trophy came into existence in 1986, and it has continued to this day. So 38 years the President's Trophy has been awarded, 38 times. And I thought I would take a look back at this, because the first year the President's Trophy is awarded, it is won by the Edmonton Oilers in 1986. They finished with 119 points that year. They lost in the second round to the Calgary Flames. That, of course, had the infamous Steve Smith goal that basically it was an own goal, and it really helped Calgary knock off what was becoming a juggernaut in the Edmonton Oilers. The next year, though, in 1987, the Oilers again win the President's Trophy. They finish with 106 points. This time, they win the Stanley Cup. They defeat the Philadelphia Flyers in the final, and that is the first time that a team has won the President's Trophy, at least since 1986. A team that had won the President's Trophy as the league's best team during the regular season wins the Stanley Cup. That did not happen again. That didn't happen the very next year. The next year, in 1988, the Calgary Flames win the President's Trophy. They have 105 points. They lose in the second round to the Edmonton Oilers. But in 1989, the Calgary Flames again win the President's Trophy. They finish with 117 points. They win the Stanley Cup. They defeat the Montreal Canadiens to do it. And we all remember, at least I remember as a kid, Lanny McDonald with that big bushy red mustache, scores that goal, watching him celebrate, and his very last game as a player, he's carrying the Stanley Cup around. It was incredible. It was one moment that I as a kid will never forget. It was so cool. I so loved seeing that. Especially hearing a lot of Lanny was coming down to the tail end of his career and everything. Injuries, he didn't get a lot of playing time, but he was the captain. He was out there, and he retired after he wins the Stanley Cup. He retires as a player, and he basically walks right into the Hall of Fame. But in 1990, the team that wins the President's Trophy does not win the Cup. The Boston Bruins in 1990 win the President's Trophy. They have 101 points. They lose in the Stanley Cup final to, who else? Edmonton. That is Edmonton's 5th Stanley Cup in 7 years in 1990. 1991, it is the Chicago Blackhawks' turn to win the President's Trophy. 106 points to basically, they didn't quite run away with the Norris division that year because St. Louis was a really good team too. But in what I considered one of the biggest upsets ever, especially considering where you look at where they were points wise, the Chicago Blackhawks, they lose in the first round in the Norris Division semifinal to the Minnesota North Stars. A team that, because of the playoff format at the time, they made the playoffs because they were 4th place in their division. But should they have really made the playoffs? No. No, they should not have. But they did. They made the playoffs, and they upset the Chicago Blackhawks en route to going all the way to the Stanley Cup final, where then they lost to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But that series in 1991, incredible. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. 1992, we have the New York Rangers as the President's Trophy winners. They have 105 points. They lose in the second round. They lose in the what is the Patrick Division final. They lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins, of course, that year, they went on to become the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. But the Rangers won the President's Trophy that year. No Stanley Cup. 1993, the Pittsburgh Penguins. They win the President's Trophy. 114 points. They were on just an insane roll. Absolutely insane roll. I don't know what it is. I don't know if they got cocky or what, but they lost in the second round. They lost to the New York Islanders in the second round. That was a major upset because the Penguins were a team that a lot of people were looking, especially when they won the President's Trophy that year. They're coming off back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. You're thinking this team could win 3 in a row. They did not. They ran into the New York Islanders, and the New York Islanders took them out. 1994. We get back to a President's Trophy winner winning the Stanley Cup. The New York Rangers in 94. They finished with 112 points. They win the Stanley Cup. They beat the Vancouver Canucks in the Stanley Cup final in 7 games. And an amazing Stanley Cup final. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And that, of course, the Rangers, unfortunately, that was their first Stanley Cup championship since 1940. And needless to say, they have not won the Stanley Cup since. So they end one curse, but then it almost comes back like they're in another curse again. 1995, we have a lockout-shortened season. We have a 48-game season. I think it was a 48-game season. The Detroit Red Wings win the President's Trophy. They finished with 70 points. And they lost in the Stanley Cup final to the New Jersey Devils. And the Devils were, they were a team. They kind of came out of nowhere. Not a lot was expected of them. I think a lot of people thought Detroit was just going to steamroll them because Detroit had, they had Yzerman, they had Fedorov, they had Larionov, Fetisov. I mean, they had all these great players, and they ran into a buzzsaw that was the New Jersey Devils. I mean, I guess I shouldn't really say buzzsaw. They just ran into the neutral zone trap, basically. And there wasn't much they could do about it. 1996, the Red Wings again win the President's Trophy. They finish with 131 points. This is where they finish. They win 62 games. They set the record for the best regular season in NHL history. 131 points. And this is where the rivalry between them and the Colorado Avalanche really begins. Because it is in that third round, they lose to Colorado in the conference final. And the fights and everything, I think that was the series. That was the Claude Lemieux hit on Chris Draper. And yeah, it was a vicious rivalry after that for a long time. But yeah, they won 62 games that year. No Stanley Cup. 1997. Little payback here for Detroit. 1997. The Colorado Avalanche. They win the President's Trophy. 107 points. They lose in the conference final to the Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings, of course, go on to win their first of 2 straight Stanley Cups that year. So Colorado knocks off Detroit in the conference final in 96. When Detroit wins the President's Trophy, Detroit gets even the next year in that same third round. 1998, the Dallas Stars. They win the President's Trophy. It's their turn to get the President's Trophy. 109 points. They lose in the conference final to the Detroit Red Wings. Detroit, of course, that was their second of back-to-back Stanley Cups. 1999. Here we finally get back to a team that wins the President's Trophy and wins the Stanley Cup. The Dallas Stars finished the season with 114 points. They win the Stanley Cup, beating the Buffalo Sabres in very dubious fashion on a goal that honestly should not have counted at the time. They changed the rule after that. But at the time, it's a call that should have been reviewed, but it wasn't. And, Dallas still they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. They might have ended up winning the Cup anyway, but you never know. 2000, the St. Louis Blues, their turn to win the President's Trophy, their only time winning the President's Trophy. They finished the regular season with 114 points. Amazing season. Not an amazing playoff. They lose in the first round to the San Jose Sharks. They lose in that conference quarterfinal to San Jose, a 1-8. And, I mean, insane. Just crazy. That, a lot of people didn't think San Jose could beat St. Louis. I didn't think so at the time. They thought they could, and they knocked off St. Louis. 2001, back to a President's Trophy champion, or a President's Trophy winner becoming Stanley Cup champion. The Colorado Avalanche. 2001, they finished the regular season with 118 points. They win the Stanley Cup, beating the New Jersey Devils in what was an amazing 7-game series. And I mean, that's the Ray Bourque series. I mean, that's the Ray Bourque Stanley Cup. And amazing run by Colorado. I was so happy to see Ray Bourque finally get his name on the Stanley Cup. It was amazing to see. And just like in 1989 with Lanny McDonald, Ray Bourque skates the Stanley Cup, basically walks off into the and just rides off into the sunset and right into the Hall of Fame. 2002. Now here's a rarity. Back-to-back President's Trophy winners winning the Stanley Cup. 2002. The Detroit Red Wings again. They're back on the President's Trophy list here. They finished the regular season with 116 points. They win the Stanley Cup, beating the Carolina Hurricanes in 5 games. And Carolina was an upstart team that really nobody thought they would do much. And they rode that momentum all the way to the final. And then they ran into the Detroit Red Wings, who basically said, you do know we're here, right? You're a good upstart, but yeah, we're the big dog. We're the big dogs that run this yard. So Detroit ends up winning that Stanley Cup. Sorry, I had to pause for a little coughing fit there. I got the allergies that are kicking my backside right now. Have been for the last couple of days. But, that's seasonal allergies. It happens. But yeah, Detroit wins the Stanley Cup in 2002. That, I believe, that will not be their last time winning the Stanley Cup. It won't be their last time winning the President's Trophy either. 2003, the Ottawa Senators get on this list. They get on the board as President's Trophy winners, finishing with the best record in the NHL. 113 points they finished with that year. Great season. They make a run all the way to the conference final. And then they run into the New Jersey Devils. And the Devils take them out. The Devils go on to win their 3rd Stanley Cup. And I mean, it's, in Ottawa, that's the only time Ottawa's been on the President's Trophy list. It just goes to show, you look back at that and it's like, man, Ottawa used to be a good team. Ottawa used to be a really good team. You can tell that's been a while now, though. 2004. Here's Detroit again, back on the President's Trophy list. They finished the regular season with 109 points. However, they lose in the first round to an upstart team from Calgary who turned that into a hell of a run. They lose to the Calgary Flames in the first round. Calgary, of course, made an impressive run all the way to the Stanley Cup final, where they end up coming up short, although ask a lot of people in Canada, especially up in Calgary, they'll swear up and down that was a goal. I think it might have been too, but you didn't have the technology then that you have now that you really could scrutinize it. But, it wasn't counted as a goal. Tampa ends up winning the game. Tampa goes back home, and Tampa wins the Stanley Cup in 2004. Now, we lose a season. We lose a season due to a lockout. We lost the entire 04-05 season. So there's no President's Trophy winner for 04-05. So we jump right to 2006. And who wins the President's Trophy again? Well, look at that. It's the Detroit Red Wings again. 124 points they put up. Another amazing regular season. And what happens to them? They run into the Edmonton Oilers in the first round. In the conference quarterfinal, they lose to the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers, of course, a lot like Calgary 2 years prior, they make an improbable run to the Stanley Cup final. And they get all the way to 7 games. They get into Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. They come up just a little short, though, unfortunately. But they knocked, just like their Alberta, their Alberta compadre. They go all the way to they ride that wave to the Stanley Cup final. Neither team won the Stanley Cup, but they rode that wave all the way to it by knocking out the team that had won the President's Trophy that year. And it just oddly enough was the Detroit Red Wings both times. 2007. Now, boy, you want to talk about a long time ago? It's the only time these guys are on the list, and not a lot of people remember. This was a really good team back in the early to mid 2000s. The Buffalo Sabres. They finished the regular season with 113 points. Amazing season. It's looking like they might ride that wave to the Stanley Cup final. Yeah, no, not quite. They ran into the Ottawa Senators. The Ottawa Senators. In 2007, they upset the Buffalo Sabres to get to the Stanley Cup final, where then they get absolutely destroyed by the Anaheim Ducks. So we don't know exactly if Buffalo would have fared much better. Anaheim was an amazing team that year. But, Buffalo, fantastic year. They come up a little short. They make it all the way to the third round. And needless to say, Buffalo, since then, it's been a mess. It has been an unmitigated disaster ever since. But back then, the Buffalo Sabres team was a hell of a good team. 2008, we're back to Detroit making the President's Trophy list, and we're back to them winning the Stanley Cup. So the last team to win the Stanley Cup before 2008 was the Detroit Red Wings in 2002. So, of course, Detroit wins the President's Trophy in 2008, and they go on to win the Stanley Cup. They defeat the Pittsburgh Penguins. They finish the regular season with 115 points. Another amazing season. This Detroit team, especially during this portion here in the 2000s, I mean, they were a Stanley Cup contender literally every season for over a decade. From about 1995 all the way up basically until 2008, 9, 10. They were a Stanley Cup contender. Basically every year. They were a threat to win the Stanley Cup for over a decade. Just an amazing run by the Detroit Red Wings. They win the Stanley Cup, though, in 2008, along with the President's Trophy. And, they of course, they would go back to the Stanley Cup final that very next year. And they would end up losing the year after that. Oddly enough, to the same team that they beat in 2008. But in 2009, we're talking about the President's Trophy here. The San Jose Sharks win the President's Trophy. Again, you look at the San Jose Sharks, especially now, they're in the middle of a rebuild. They have the number 1 overall draft pick this year. And I'm hoping to see this team build into something. I really want to see this team build into something. But here's San Jose. They finished that season with 117 points. Amazing, amazing season. But who do they run into in the first round? The team that takes them out in the conference quarterfinal. It is one of their California mates, the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks knock off the Sharks that year. And, great regular season. Not much success in the postseason, unfortunately. 2010. Now this one, another just amazing season. The Washington Capitals, they finished with 121 points in 2010. They are a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. I mean, obviously. Well, they got Carey Priced. Or no, not Carey Priced. This was, oh, jeez. I just had a brain fart on the Montreal goaltender because he stood on his head. He stood on his head against the Capitals. If again, totally, it's literally right there. I can't think of it. Let me know in the comments. What is his name? I know darn well somebody's going to say it in the comments, and I'm just going to be going, oh, of course. But, Yaroslav Halak. Thank you. I told you it was right there. Yaro Halak. The Capitals got halaked. And yeah, 121 points, and they ran into a hot goaltender. They ran into Yaroslav Halak, who just, again, stood on his head. And, he took out the Washington Capitals. 2011, we have the Vancouver Canucks on the list here. They win the President's Trophy in 2011. They finished the regular season with 117 points. They lose in the Stanley Cup final. They get all the way to the final. They're up 3-2 on the Boston Bruins, and they just can't. I don't know what it was. They looked incredible at home. They went on the road to Boston, and Boston just owned them. So Boston knocks off Vancouver in the Stanley Cup final. And, and of course, Vancouver kind of rioted. 2012, that wasn't the end of the Vancouver Canucks winning the President's Trophy. They win the President's Trophy again the very next season. So back-to-back years winning the President's Trophy, 111 points. They were to me, they were not as good as they were the year prior. And it showed in the first round when the Los Angeles Kings ran them out of the building. Just ran them out of the building. LA knocks them out in the first round. LA, of course, goes on an incredible, improbable run to the Stanley Cup final, and they win the Stanley Cup. LA only lost 4 games that run. 4! And they were a number 8 seed. Amazing run by the LA Kings that year in 2012. 2013. This is the last time that we have had a team win the President's Trophy and win the Stanley Cup in the same season. It's the Chicago Blackhawks, right there. It's a lockout shortened season. Another 48 game season, I believe. They finished with 77 points. They win the Stanley Cup. They beat the Boston Bruins in what was just an awesome original 6 matchup. And Boston went from being ahead and forcing a Game 7 to being behind and losing the Stanley Cup in Game 6, all within the span of about a minute and a half. That's how good Chicago was that year. But yeah, Chicago ends up being the last team to win the President's Trophy and win the Stanley Cup. 2014, we have the Boston Bruins here. They finished the regular season with 117 points. Great season by the Bruins. They lose in the second round to a team that's just not a good matchup for Boston, as Shannon would go and say, the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens knock off the Boston Bruins because, again, Montreal is just a bad matchup for the Boston Bruins. They just cannot seem to take them. But yeah, Montreal knocks off Boston in round 2 in 2014. So Boston's 117-point season, now that goes away. 2015, we have the New York Rangers back up here again. They finished with 113 points to win the President's Trophy. They get all the way to the conference final. And again, they run into kind of a familiar foe here. Who do they lose in the conference final to? Tampa Bay, the Tampa Bay Lightning. They, of course, they lose to the Chicago Blackhawks in the Stanley Cup final that year, does Tampa. But Tampa in the third round knocked off the team that won the President's Trophy. 2016. Now this is, again, a team that should win the Stanley Cup, was favored to win the Stanley Cup. The 2016 Washington Capitals, they win the President's Trophy. They finished the regular season with 120 points. Great season. Who was their kryptonite at the time? The team that beats them in the second round. The Pittsburgh Penguins take them out in round 2. So that, of course, that is Crosby and Ovechkin, where Crosby gets the best of Ovechkin. And, of course, who wins the Stanley Cup that year? Pittsburgh. 2017. Here's Washington again back on the board here. They finished the regular season with 118 points. Another great season. But again, you want to talk about Montreal being a bad matchup for Boston? Well, this is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a bad matchup for Washington. The Pittsburgh Penguins, again, second straight year, knock out the Washington Capitals in that second round. And of course, what does Pittsburgh do? They go on to win back-to-back Stanley Cups. 2018, we have the Nashville Predators making the President's Trophy for the first time. They have an incredible regular season. They finished with 117 points. That's coming off a Stanley Cup final appearance the year before where they came up a little short against Pittsburgh. But they came out and they win the President's Trophy that year in 2018, 117 points. They make it to the I believe it was the division final. I think that's when they went to the wild card format. But they lose in that second round to the Winnipeg Jets. And Nashville, that a good-looking team. I mean, and oddly enough, Nashville and Winnipeg ended up being the two best teams in the league that year, and they're in the same division. That was a really good division that year. But Winnipeg knocks out Nashville in 2018. Then 2019. Now this one hurt for sure. The Tampa Bay Lightning win the President's Trophy. They tie the Detroit Red Wings of 1996 in wins. 62 wins for the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2019. They looked good in that first game. They looked good in at least that first period. And then I don't know what happened. They fell apart. And they lost. They got swept in that first round by the Columbus Blue Jackets. And just crazy. Absolutely crazy to think that a team that wins 62 games can get bounced like that. But it happened. 2020. Now here we get into a couple of really weird and just stupid years. 2020, we have the pandemic start. So we have the pause and everything that was associated with that. But so when the season ended up stopping, after they came back from the pause, they said, okay, the regular season's done. The Boston Bruins had the best record. They finished with 100 points. They go into the bubble. This is the bubble playoffs. And they lose to the team that won the Stanley Cup that year. They lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the second round. And, you know, I mean, it was just they were playing all the playoffs in two locations, and it just was, there was no fans in attendance. It just, it was, you know, it was interesting for sure. But Boston ends up winning the President's Trophy. They get knocked out by the eventual champions in the Tampa Bay Lightning. And yeah, I mean, you know, not much you can really do about that. I mean, these 2 years, especially 2020 and 2021, are just they're seasons that not a lot of people really want to remember. I mean, you got to remember, you know, the team that wins the Stanley Cup, obviously, but because I mean, you win the Stanley Cup, you deserve to win the Stanley Cup. But under the circumstances that it happened, yeah, not a lot of people want to remember that. 2021. This, of course, you have the 1 year realignment with, you know, you have the Canadian division that's made up because, you know, everybody was still so, you know, acting completely stupid, you know, and yes, I will say it's stupid, completely stupid. You couldn't cross the border. You couldn't get into the U.S. and you couldn't get into Canada. So you could not cross the border. So the Canadian teams got put into one division. Well, and of course it was a shortened season again. I think 52 games, 50-some games, I think they played here. But the Colorado Avalanche, they win the President's Trophy that year. They finished with 82 points. That was the best record in the league that year. They lose in the second round to the Vegas Golden Knights. And, you know, that would be the start of some good things, though, for Colorado. 2022, the Florida Panthers, they win the President's Trophy. They finished with 122 points. Incredible season. And they get bounced. They get bounced in the second round by their state mate. They get knocked out by the Tampa Bay Lightning in the second round. Tampa, of course, that was their third straight trip to the Stanley Cup final. And I mean, who did they end up losing that final to? Well, the team that won the President's Trophy the year prior, the Colorado Avalanche. So, you know, Tampa had a great year that year. Florida won the President's Trophy. Didn't really mean much. 2023. Now, this one has got to be one of the most heartbreaking ones. 2023, the Boston Bruins. They win 65 of 82 games in regulation. 65 wins. 65 wins. They have 135 points. They have a 3-1 lead on the Florida Panthers in that first round. And what happens? I don't know if they just took Florida lightly or what the deal was. But Florida came storming back and they knocked them out. They knocked out the Boston Bruins in the first round in that divisional semifinal. Amazing comeback by Florida. Just an unbelievable collapse by the Boston Bruins. And I mean, you know, Florida, of course, they go to the Stanley Cup final, where they end up losing in the final. But, you know, heck of a run for Florida. And then we come in this year, 2024. The President's Trophy is won by the New York Rangers. They finished the regular season with 114 points. And they just recently were taken out in the conference final by the team that is making their second consecutive trip to the Stanley Cup final out of the Eastern Conference. They lose in 6 to the Florida Panthers. And I thought I would take a look at this because we have 38 different there's 38 winners up here of the President's Trophy. Only 8 of them have won the Stanley Cup. 8. That is a 211 win percentage. So winning the President's Trophy is not everything that it's cracked up to be. You know, there's a reason why a lot of people call it the President's Trophy curse, because we have not seen a team win the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup in the same year since right here. That was 2013 in the Chicago Blackhawks. That was the last time. And winning the President's Trophy is not all it's cracked up to be. You know, and the New York Rangers made a heck of a run this year. You know, they ran into a Panthers team that is just really good, and you know, are way healthier than they were last year. And whoever Florida ends up playing in that Stanley Cup final, ooh boy, it's going to be an interesting final for sure. But a 211 win percentage if you win the President's Trophy, and in comparison to winning both the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup, it's only happened 8 times out of 38 tries since 1986. A 211 win percentage. So again, is the President's Trophy a curse to some of these teams? I mean, I guess if you want to consider it a curse, you can consider it a curse. But, you know, it just depends on how you play. You know, it depends on the teams you run into. But yeah, that is the list of President's Trophy winners and the teams and the ones that won the Stanley Cup. So let me know what you guys think. Is the President's Trophy cursed? Is winning the President's Trophy, is it a curse? Are you basically bound and determined if you win the President's Trophy, you're guaranteed to not win the Stanley Cup? What do you guys think? I'd love to know. Hit that like button. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Also, please subscribe to the channel. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Also, I would absolutely love it, and I would love you for it. And if you want to share this video, go ahead and share it with with whoever you'd like. You know, you got friends, family. You know, and if you know people who love hockey content, you know, send them this way. You know, tell them about the channel. And yeah, so the President's Trophy, there's the list, the history of the President's Trophy. And again, is it a curse? Let me know what you guys think. I will see you guys later.